A woman who'd been silenced for 3 years found her voice in a room full of men who killed for less. The most dangerous person in a room isn't the loudest. It's the one who's been quiet long enough to learn where all the doors are. Let's go. The kitchen smelled like garlic and old decisions. Basement level. Sotto Voce Social Club. Carroll Gardens. An industrial stove from a decade nobody remembered. An espresso machine older than most of the men sitting around the long wooden table. And a single door at the top of a narrow staircase, bolted from the inside. 7 men, 1 table, espresso cups. A conversation in Sicilian dialect so dense and fast that the words stacked on top of each other like bricks being laid by someone building a wall in a hurry. Lux Pemberton sat at the end of the table with a leather-bound Italian-English dictionary held together by a rubber band and the specific posture of a woman trying to occupy as little space as possible. She'd been hired 3 hours ago. Emergency call. A translation agency she freelanced for. Corporate contracts, legal briefs, the occasional medical consult. This job came with no brief, no context. Just an address, a time, and a rate 3 times her normal fee. The man who'd opened the basement door had looked at her for 4 seconds without speaking, then stepped aside. The international gesture for you're expected, but not yet trusted. Now she translated, sentence by sentence. And the men spoke, and she converted their words into English for the one person at the table who needed it. A broad-shouldered American sitting at the midpoint, taking notes on a legal pad, nodding at intervals that suggested he understood more than he was letting on. Julio Barbieri sat at the head. She hadn't been told his name. Didn't need to be. The room's architecture told her. Every voice angled toward him, every pause waited for his response. Every cup of espresso was poured after his was filled. The specific gravity of a man who didn't need volume to command attention. Dark hair, early 40s, a face that looked like it had been patient for so long that patience had become a permanent feature. He wore a black shirt, no jewelry, no watch, the deliberate absence of display, the uniform of a man who'd decided long ago that power didn't need accessories. He hadn't looked at Lux directly, not once. Yet she existed in his peripheral vision the way furniture exists, functional, positioned, unremarkable. This was familiar. 3 years with Breck Holloway had taught her what it felt like to be furniture, to translate not just languages, but herself, making her voice smaller, her opinions thinner, her presence a thing that served without disrupting. Breck. The name surfaced like nausea. She pushed it down, focused on the dialect, converted the words, did the job. Younce then. At 11:47 p.m., the bolted door at the top of the staircase shook. Not a knock, an impact. Shoulder first. The sound of a body hitting reinforced wood with the specific fury of a man who'd tracked something he considered his property to a location that wasn't going to give it back politely. The 7 men went silent. Espresso cups paused mid-air. A second impact. The bolt held, barely. Julio Barbieri looked up, not at the door, at Lux. First time, direct. His eyes, dark, calibrated, with the gaze of a man who cataloged threats the way librarians catalog books. Found hers and held them. "Is that for you?" he asked. Low, calm, the voice of a man who already knew the answer and was giving her the chance to say it herself. Lux's dictionary pressed against her lap, her mother's handwriting in the margins. 3 years of silence sitting in her throat like a stone. The door buckled on the 3rd hit. And Lux Pemberton, translator, furniture, East woman who hadn't spoken her own words in someone else's presence since the first night Breck taught her what silence cost, opened her mouth. "Yes," she said, "and he's not going to stop. Hey you. Yes, you. Wherever you are right now. Under the covers. On your commute. Hiding from somebody's kids for 5 minutes of peace. I see you, and I'm glad you're here. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city, your country. And be honest, how are you really doing tonight? It's not the fine you tell coworkers. The real answer. Bring it in here. And listen, are you subscribed? Because this story has 9 parts, and each one hits harder than the last. If you're not locked in yet, fix that now. You'll thank yourself by part 4. 14 months earlier, Astoria, Queens. Lux Pemberton learned languages the way some children learn to hide. Early, instinctively, because survival required it. Her mother, Odette, was a French-Algerian translator who'd emigrated to New York at 22 with a dictionary in her bag and a theory that words were the only currency no one could devalue. She raised Lux alone in a walk-up on Steinway Street. No father in the picture. No apology for his absence. Odette spoke 4 languages, taught Lux 3 by the time she was 12. French, Italian, Arabic. Not through formal lessons. Through living. French at breakfast. Italian with the neighbors. Arabic when Odette was angry, because rage in your mother tongue hits different than rage in translation. The dictionary was Odette's. Leather-bound. Italian-English. Published in 1979. Held together with a rubber band after the spine cracked during a movie when Lux was 9. Every margin contained Odette's pencil notes, corrections, alternatives, the occasional personal commentary. Yes, next to the Italian word for silence, silenzio, Odette had written, "The most expensive thing a woman can be taught to keep." Odette died when Lux was 19. Stroke. No warning. One morning, she was conjugating verbs at the kitchen table. By evening, she was a body in a hospital bed, and Lux was holding a dictionary that smelled like her mother's hand lotion and contained the only voice she'd never have to translate. Breck Holloway arrived 2 years later. Lux was 21, freelancing, building a client list for translation work, making enough to cover rent and groceries with the specific discipline of a woman who'd learned from Odette that financial independence wasn't a luxury, it was architecture. Breck was 28, ran a translation services company called LinguaPoint. Met Lux at an industry mixer in Midtown. Charming, attentive, the kind of man who listened with his whole body and made you feel like your words were the most important sounds in the room. 6 months later, he moved into her apartment. 6 months after that, her client list disappeared. Breck absorbed her contracts into LinguaPoint. Logical, he said. Efficient. Why maintain 2 businesses when one could handle everything? She agreed, because agreement had become the path of least resistance, and resistance had become something Breck responded to with a silence so heavy it rearranged the furniture of her confidence. The hitting started in year 2. What not this story's business to detail. What matters is the architecture. Breck didn't just damage Lux's body. He dismantled her voice, deleted contacts from her phone, mocked her translations, told her the dictionary, her mother's dictionary, was sentimental junk that made her look unprofessional. He hit it once, 3 days. Lux searched the apartment with the desperation of a woman looking for the last piece of a person she'd lost. Found it in a box in the closet under his winter coats. Joe rubber band still intact. Odette's margin notes still legible. She never let it leave her bag again. The day she left Breck, 11 months ago, she waited until he was at the LinguaPoint office, packed 1 bag, the dictionary, 2 changes of clothes, her passport, walked out the door of the apartment that had been hers before it became his and didn't look back. Moved to a sublet in Sunnyside. Changed her phone number. Took freelance jobs through a different agency. Atto built the walls that women build after men like Breck. Invisible, load-bearing, designed to hold everything up while looking like nothing's wrong. Now. The basement kitchen. Sotto Voce Social Club. The door buckling. Lux gripped the dictionary under the table. Breck on the other side of that door. 11 months of new walls about to be demolished by the same man who'd torn down the old ones. The 7 men at the table hadn't moved. But their silence had changed texture. From interrupted to operational, the quiet of men assessing a threat and calculating response. Julio Barbieri stood, not fast. The measured rise of a man whose body had learned that speed communicated panic, and panic was a language he refused to speak. Cesare, he said. One word, one name. A man at the far end. Cesare Montagna, 50-something, built like a shipping container with reading glasses, stood and moved to the base of the staircase. Yet not rushing, positioning. Julio looked at Lux again. Second time. The assessment deeper now, not cataloging her as furniture, but as context. A woman with a dictionary in her lap and a man breaking down a door to reach her. What's his name? Julio asked. Breck Holloway. Is he armed? He doesn't need to be. The sentence carried everything. 3 years compressed into 5 words. De Julio received them the way he received Sicilian dialect at that table, listening for the meaning beneath the language. The door cracked at the hinges. One more hit would open it. Julio unbuttoned his cuff, rolled his sleeve to the elbow. The gesture of a man preparing not for violence but for work. The specific, methodical work of handling a problem that had just arrived uninvited at his table. Stay seated, he told Lux. Not commanding, informing. Yet the tone of a man who understood that a woman who'd been told what to do for 3 years needed to hear the difference between an order and a safety instruction. Lux stayed seated, not because he told her to, because for the first time in 3 years, the man giving the instruction had looked her in the eye when he said it. 11:49 p.m. The door opened, not opened, surrendered. Yet the bolt tore from the frame on the 4th impact, and the door swung inward with the exhausted compliance of something that had held as long as it could. Breck Holloway stood at the top of the staircase, 31, 6'2", the build of a man who used the gym as a performance rather than a practice. Muscles maintained for visibility, not utility. Blonde hair pushed back. Shakes. A face that had been handsome before entitlement hardened it into something that looked like confidence from a distance and looked like threat from up close. He was breathing hard. The exertion of breaking down a door he'd tracked Lux to through methods this story would reveal later, but not yet. Right now, he stood in the doorway and looked down the narrow staircase into a basement kitchen containing 7 men, 1 woman, and a silence that should have told him everything he needed to know. And it didn't, because men like Breck don't read rooms. They enter them expecting the room to adjust. Lux. His voice carried the specific ownership of a man saying a name he considered his property. Get up. We're leaving. Nobody moved. The espresso machine hissed, a mechanical exhale in a room that had stopped breathing. Yeah. The 7 men at the table sat with the coordinated stillness of people who'd been in rooms where violence arrived uninvited and had learned that the first person to move determined the direction of everything that followed. Cesare Montagna stood at the base of the staircase, between Breck and the table, hands at his sides, reading glasses still on. The image of a man who could break a person in half while looking like he'd rather be reading the newspaper. Breck descended 3 steps. Yet his eyes found Lux at the end of the table, the dictionary in her lap, the posture he recognized. Small, contained, a woman making herself furniture. He'd built that posture, trained it into her over 3 years the way you train a muscle through repetition. I said get up. Lux's hands tightened on the dictionary. Odette's margin notes under her fingertips. The penciled word beside silencio. Her mother's handwriting, faded but legible. The most expensive thing a woman can be taught to keep. She didn't get up. Julio Barbieri picked up his espresso, sipped it, set it down. The specific performance of a man demonstrating that the person in his doorway had not disrupted his evening, had not, in fact, registered as anything more than an inconvenience requiring a brief administrative response. You broke my door, Julio said. Conversational, the tone of a man discussing property damage rather than confrontation. Breck looked at him for the first time, at the assessment of a man calculating whether the person speaking to him mattered. Breck's calculation, based on the basement location, the old kitchen, the social club setting, concluded, no, wrong calculation, fatal calculation. The kind of miscalculation that happens when a man confuses aesthetics with authority and assumes that power lives in penthouses rather than basements. I don't know who you are, Breck said, and I don't care. Yeah, that woman is mine, and I'm taking her home. That woman, Julio said, is working. She's been hired for the evening. Her services are contracted and compensated, which means for the duration of this meeting, she's under the protection of this table. Protection of this, Breck laughed, short, dismissive, the laugh of a man who'd never been in a room where his dismissiveness would cost him. She's a freelance translator. She types words into documents. Yet you're acting like she's valuable, Julio finished. Yes, I am. The word landed in the kitchen like a change in pressure. Lux felt it in her sternum. Valuable. A word Breck had spent 3 years extracting from her vocabulary, telling her the translations were amateur, the dictionary was junk, the languages were a party trick, not a profession. Julio Barbieri, a man she'd known for 3 hours, had just said the word Breck had made her forget. Breck stepped off the last stair, it onto the kitchen floor. Cesare shifted, 1 step left, closing the angle, not blocking, redirecting. The geometry of a man who managed threats through positioning rather than confrontation. I'm not asking again, Breck said, looking at Lux, the voice she knew, the frequency that had controlled her sleep schedule, her phone calls, her volume, her clothing, the direction of her eyes when other men were in the room. Lux looked at Julio, not for permission, and for something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Witness. Someone watching who would remember what she said next. I'm not going with you, Lux said. 5 words. Quiet. Steady. The first complete sentence of refusal she'd spoken to Breck Holloway since the night he'd closed his hand around her wrist and taught her the cost of disagreement. Breck moved toward her. 2 steps. Fast. He didn't take a third. Cesare's hand landed on Breck's shoulder, not a grab. A placement. Yeah, the way you place a stop on a machine. Mechanical. Precise. Final. Breck's forward motion ended as if the air between him and Lux had solidified into a wall. Julio stood, walked to Breck, stopped at a distance close enough to be heard at a whisper and far enough to make Breck understand that the distance was a courtesy, not a limitation. You've entered my place of business, broken my property, interrupted my meeting, and addressed a woman under my contract with the voice of a man who believes ownership applies to people. Julio's tone hadn't changed, still conversational, still the cadence of a man discussing something administrative. You're going to leave now. Through the door you broke, and you're not going to look for her again. Or what? Julio didn't answer. He picked up his espresso, finished it, set the cup down with the soft click of ceramic on wood. So the 7 men at the table looked at Breck with the collective patience of people who'd heard the question, or what before, and had never once needed to answer it verbally. Breck looked at the room. For the first time, actually looked, read it. The stillness, the positioning, the specific quality of calm that exists in rooms where violence isn't a threat, but a scheduling decision. He left, up the stairs, through the broken door, gone. Yet but Lux knew, the way women who've survived men like Breck always know, that gone didn't mean finished. It meant next time, day 1, 12:23 a.m. After the meeting, the 7 men left in intervals. Not together, spaced. 3 minutes between each departure, The choreography of people who understood that a group exiting a building at midnight attracted the kind of attention that a single man walking to his car did not. Lux sat at the table, dictionary in her lap. Amon's the kitchen emptying around her like a theater after the show. Chairs pushed back, espresso cups collected by a man named Salvatore, who washed dishes with the focus of someone performing surgery. Cesare Montagna was the second to last to leave. He stopped beside Lux's chair, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the posture of a man about to say something he'd been holding since she arrived. "You should go home tonight," he said. Quiet, not threatening, and at the opposite. The urgent gentleness of a man delivering advice he needed her to take seriously. "I don't have a safe home to go to." "Then you should find one. Before tomorrow. Before this gets more complicated than a broken door and a jealous ex." "What gets more complicated?" Cesare looked toward the staircase, toward Julio, who was on the phone in the hallway above, voice low, Sicilian, the rapid cadence of a man issuing instructions to people who didn't require explanations. Everything," Cesare said, and left. The warning sat in Lux's chest like a fishbone, small, sharp, impossible to swallow or cough up. Cesare hadn't threatened her. He'd tried to protect her. The distinction was clear, but the context was missing. Protect her from what? From Breck? From Julio? From the reason she'd been hired in the first place? Julio descended the stairs. Phone call finished. Said he moved through the kitchen with the economy of a man who'd spent decades in this room and knew its measurements by muscle memory. Refilling the mocha pot without looking, lighting the stove with a match struck on the first attempt, producing 2 cups from a cabinet he opened without checking which shelf. He poured, set 1 cup in front of Lux, sat across from her. "Your ex," Julio said. How did he find you here?" "I don't know." "You changed your phone number when you left him?" "Yes." "Your freelance work, does it still route through the same agency?" "Yes. Lingua Services Collective. They dispatch assignments to—" "Who owns Lingua Services Collective?" The question stopped her, not because she didn't know the answer, yet because the answer had never mattered until this moment, until a man in a basement kitchen asked it with the tone of someone who already knew and was testing whether she did. "It's independent. A dispatch platform. Freelancers register and the platform's parent company is LinguaPoint, registered in Delaware, owned by Breck Holloway." The kitchen went silent. The espresso machine, always humming, always present, seemed to pull back. And even the machinery understood that what had just been said required space. Breck still controlled the dispatch system. Every freelance assignment Lux had taken in 11 months, every new client, every emergency call, every job that arrived on her phone with an address and a time, had been routed through a company Breck owned. He hadn't lost her. He'd never lost her. And she'd changed her number and her apartment and her daily route. And he'd tracked every assignment because the work itself was the leash. Including tonight. Including this basement. "He sent me here," Lux said, the realization arriving as words rather than thoughts. "The emergency call, the address, the rate 3 times my normal fee. He routed me to this meeting." "Yes." "Why?" Julio lifted his espresso. Didn't drink. Held it. At the pause of a man choosing between the partial truth that would keep things simple and the full truth that would change everything. "That's a longer conversation," he said, "and it requires you to make a decision first." "What decision?" "Whether you stay here tonight or leave through the door your ex already knows the location of." Not a command. A framework. And 2 options presented with equal weight. Stay in a stranger's building or walk into a city where the man who'd controlled her for 3 years had just demonstrated he knew exactly where she was at all times. "If I stay," Lux said, "what happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I explain why you were hired, why Breck sent you here, and what his company has been using your bank account for since the day you registered as a freelancer. My bank account? Longer conversation. Tomorrow. Yet tonight? There's a room upstairs. Private. Door locks from the inside. Nobody enters without your permission, including me. The phrasing, including me, stated, not implied. The specific language of a man who understood that a woman leaving an abusive relationship cataloged every man's relationship to locked doors and needed to hear, explicitly, where this one stood. Lux looked at the staircase. The broken door at the top had been temporarily secured. Salvatore had nailed a crossbar while washing dishes, multitasking with the calm of a man who'd repaired damage in this building before. She looked at her dictionary, her mother's handwriting, the margin note beside fiducia, trust, given in inches, not miles. I'll stay, she said, but I'm keeping the key. There is no key, just the lock. It's yours. She climbed the stairs at 1 a.m. Small room, clean, a single bed, as a window facing the alley, a radiator clicking with the irregular rhythm of old heating systems. The lock was a deadbolt, heavy, functional. She turned it and heard the mechanism engage and stood in the silence of a room that, for the first time in 11 months, felt sealed against the specific man she needed sealing from. The dictionary went on the bedside table, rubber band intact. Odette's notes facing up, the margin beside voice. Use it or lose it to someone who'll use it for you. Lux lay down, didn't sleep, stared at the ceiling and thought about bank accounts and dispatch platforms and a man downstairs who'd called her valuable before he'd known her name. Something was wrong with this story. Not wrong as in broken, wrong as in incomplete. Pieces she couldn't see yet, a shape forming in the dark that she'd need daylight to identify. Cesare's warning pulsed beneath everything. Before this gets more complicated, it was already complicated. And Lux, fluent in 3 languages, silent in her own life for 3 years, was beginning to understand that the most important translation she'd ever perform wouldn't be Italian to English. It would be translating the difference between a man who locked her in and a man who gave her the lock. Day 2, 9:04 a.m. The kitchen. Julio had a file, not a manila folder, not a single document. A file, thick, tabbed, organized with the specific discipline of a man who'd been compiling evidence the way architects compile blueprints, methodically, over time, with the understanding that every page was a load-bearing wall in a structure designed to bring something down. He set it on the kitchen table. Same chairs, same espresso. But the room felt different in daylight. The basement kitchen less atmospheric, more operational, a workspace. Yes, the herbs on the windowsill catching morning light through narrow ground-level windows. Salvatore's crossbar still holding the broken door shut above them. Lux sat with her dictionary in her lap. Habit. The weight of it grounding her the way a heartbeat grounds a body. Constant, unconscious, necessary. Lingua point, Julio said, opening the file. Registered in Delaware, 18 months ago. Parent company of 4 subsidiary platforms. Including Lingua Services Collective, the dispatch service you freelance through. You said last night he was using my bank account. Not just yours. 43 freelance translators registered across the 4 platforms. Each one provided banking information during onboarding. Standard practice for direct deposit payments. Breck Holloway has been routing money through those accounts. Small amounts. Irregular intervals. It is structured to avoid federal reporting thresholds. Structured to avoid money laundering. Your bank account and 42 others have been used as pass-throughs for funds originating from sources that can't move money through traditional channels. The kitchen held the words the way the kitchen held everything, with the patient absorption of a room that had heard confessions and calculations and the specific weight of truths that changed the shape of people's lives. Lux's hands went flat on the table, the posture of a woman stabilizing herself against information that was rearranging the floor beneath her. "How much?" she asked. "Through your account specifically." "Approximately $91,000 over 11 months. Deposited in small increments. Withdrawn within 48 hours through automated transfers to offshore accounts. The deposits appear as freelance payments. The withdrawals appear as business expenses. Yet on paper, your account looks like a busy translator receiving and spending income. In reality, you're a conduit. I didn't authorize any of this. You authorized direct deposit access during onboarding. The terms of service, written by Breck's legal team, include a clause granting LinguaPoint administrative access to linked financial accounts for payment processing purposes. That clause is the legal cover, thin, arguably fraudulent, yet but functional enough to delay an investigation if anyone looked. Has anyone looked? Julio turned a page in the file, a printout. Federal Financial Crimes Enforcement Network header. A suspicious activity report flagging Lux Pemberton's account for unusual transaction patterns. FinCEN flagged your account 6 weeks ago. Routine algorithmic detection. The investigation is preliminary, but it's active, which means within 90 days, federal agents will examine your banking records and find $91,000 in transactions you didn't make, can't explain, and didn't know about. Hear this clearly, because this is the turn and you need to feel it. Lux Pemberton, a woman who left an abusive man, rebuilt her life from a single bag and a dictionary, took every freelance job she could find to survive, is now the financial fingerprint on a money laundering operation she didn't know existed. Jan, her ex, didn't just control her voice. He wired her into a criminal infrastructure, made her complicit without consent, used her survival as the mechanism for his profit. If that doesn't hit you somewhere real, drop a comment and tell me where this story finds you tonight. Because it found me somewhere I wasn't ready for. And carry this, the midpoint lesson. Strength isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing who you trust with your fear and being right. Lux opened the dictionary. Not for translation, for grounding. The pages falling open to a section she'd read 1,000 times. The res ricominciare, to begin again. Her mother's note in the margin. Not from scratch, from knowledge. But today, her eyes caught something she'd never examined. On the inside back cover, Odette's handwriting, smaller than the margin notes, written in pencil so light it was almost invisible. A notation Lux had assumed was a publisher's reference or a library code. She'd never read it closely because she'd never needed to. 5 words. In French. Les mots sont des preuves. Words are evidence. Lux stared at it. Her mother, a translator who'd built a life converting one language into another, had written a message in the back of her dictionary that wasn't a translation. It was a philosophy, an instruction, a truth buried in a book that Lux had carried for 7 years without seeing it. Words are evidence. Every contract Breck wrote, every clause granting access, every deposit routed through her account, every term of service she'd signed without reading because she'd trusted the man who handed it to her. Words are evidence. I want to see the onboarding documents, Lux said, looking up from the dictionary. Every contract I signed through LinguaPoint, every terms of service agreement, every clause. Julio studied her. The same assessment from last night, but recalibrated. Yet he'd been watching a woman absorb the news that her life had been wired into a criminal operation. He'd expected fear, expected collapse, expected the specific paralysis that comes from learning that your escape wasn't an escape at all, but a longer leash. Instead, she was asking for documents, asking for the words. Because a woman whose mother wrote Les mots sont des preuves in the back of a dictionary understood that the same language used to trap her could be used to dismantle the trap. Ronan Calvanese, my attorney, has copies of everything, Julio said. I'll have them here by noon. And the federal investigation. FinCN. Can I get ahead of it? If you cooperate voluntarily, provide testimony, demonstrate you were unknowing, hand over the documentation, yes. Cooperation before indictment changes everything. It's the difference between being a suspect and being a witness. Then I cooperate. Today, before Breck finds out you have this file, and before FinCEN moves from preliminary to active. Julio closed the file, leaned back. The chair creaked. Old wood. Decades of weight. There's something else, he said. The reason I hired you specifically. You said it was an emergency translation job. The translation was real. The meeting was real. But you weren't random. I selected you from the LinguaPoint roster because your account was the one FinCEN flagged. And I needed to meet you in person. Assess whether you were complicit or compromised. And? Compromised. Entirely. A woman carrying her mother's dictionary to a job she took because she needed the money. That's not a money launderer. That's a target. Lux held his gaze. 5 seconds. The longest she'd looked directly at a man since Breck. Not because Julio had earned her trust. It's because her mother's handwriting was still warm under her fingers and the words in the back cover were still ringing, and she was done. Permanently, structurally done. Being a woman who looked away. Then let's give them what they need, she said. Every word. Day 2, 4:47 p.m. The kitchen. Ronan Calvanese arrived at noon with the documents. Left at 2 with a legal strategy. By 4, the strategy was already obsolete. Lux's bank account was frozen. Not by FinCEN. Not by a federal order. By Breck. The same administrative access clause buried in the LinguaPoint terms of service that had allowed him to route money through her account also allowed him to initiate a security hold. Fraud prevention, the paperwork claimed. Unauthorized access detected. Standard protocol. The notification arrived on Lux's phone at 3:51 p.m. A text from her bank, automated, clinical, and the digital voice of an institution that didn't know the difference between fraud prevention and financial warfare. Your account has been temporarily restricted due to suspicious activity. Contact your financial institution for resolution. Resolution. As if calling a customer service line would undo 3 years of control repackaged as a security protocol. Lux sat at the kitchen table. The notification on the screen. The dictionary beside her. Every dollar she had. Savings, freelance income. It's the architecture of 11 months of independent survival, locked behind a clause she'd signed because a man she'd trusted handed her a document and she believed the words meant what they said. It got worse. At 4:12 p.m., Julio's phone. Cesare Montagna calling from a contact inside the NYPD. Holloway filed a missing persons report. 2 hours ago. 32nd Precinct. Claims Lux Pemberton is a mentally unstable domestic partner who disappeared from their shared residence. And he's listed as emergency contact. He's requesting welfare check authority. Julio relayed the information to Lux with the controlled delivery of a man who understood that each word was a brick being added to a wall already pressing against her. He filed a missing persons with a mental health component. If the precinct grants a welfare check, any officer who locates you can detain you for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation based on his statement. I left him 11 months ago. We don't share a residence. His filing claims otherwise. Lists your Sunnyside sublet as a secondary address connected to his primary lease. He's framing the separation as an episode, not a departure. Stop. Feel this. Every exit she built, he wired. Every wall she raised, he'd already installed a door. The bank account, the dispatch platform, the missing persons report, the psychiatric hold. Each one a system designed to make her freedom temporary, and his control permanent. Yes, Breck Holloway doesn't chase with fists anymore. He chases with paperwork, with clauses, with the specific understanding that a woman can be caged by language as effectively as by locks. And the woman whose mother wrote, "Words are evidence," is now drowning in words that have been weaponized against her. Lux stood, walked to the basement window, ground level. The view was ankles and sidewalk and the wheels of passing cars. The perspective of someone looking at the world from below. She'd been below before, after Odette died, after Breck's first hit, after the morning she'd packed one bag and walked out with nothing but a dictionary, and the belief that leaving was enough. Leaving wasn't enough. Breck had proven that. You could leave a man's house and still live inside his infrastructure, could change your number and still be routed through his platforms, could build a new life and discover it was constructed on his foundation. "Yeah, I can't fight paperwork with paperwork," Lux said. "He has attorneys, resources, a company that generates enough legitimate revenue to fund a legal strategy designed to make me disappear into a psych hold." "You're not fighting alone," Julio said. "I've heard that before, from the last man who said it and then used my bank account as a washing machine." The sentence hit the room like a slap. Lux hadn't directed it at Julio specifically, but the shrapnel didn't discriminate. Good. She was standing in another man's kitchen, dependent on another man's resources, trusting another man's file, while her bank account was frozen and her name was on a missing persons report. And every system she'd relied on had been revealed as a mechanism of the man she'd fled. Julio received the words without flinching. Didn't defend. Didn't explain. Sat with them the way he sat with everything. Patiently, structurally, absorbing impact without redirecting it. "You're right to distrust this," he said. "Every piece of it, including Maître. I don't distrust you. I distrust the pattern. Men who offer protection, men who have files, men who say stay and I stay because the alternative is worse. That's not trust. It's arithmetic. Then change the math. How? Stop being the variable in someone else's equation. The FinCEN investigation, your account is flagged regardless of what Breck does. The missing persons report. It's filed regardless of where you are. The frozen account, it's locked regardless of who you trust." He paused. "Those things are happening to you. The question is whether you respond to them from inside Breck's framework or from outside it." Outside it means what? It means you don't run, don't hide, don't contest his filings through his systems. You go directly to FinCEN, voluntarily. Before they come to you, you provide testimony. You hand over every document Ronan prepared today, and you do it not as a suspect, but as a cooperating witness whose ex-boyfriend has been laundering money through her identity for 11 months. And the missing persons report disappears the moment you appear. Voluntarily, at a federal building, on camera, lucid, competent, holding documentation that proves you're not missing, you're testifying. The kitchen, the herbs, the espresso machine humming its permanent mechanical hum, yet the dictionary on the table with Odette's inscription in the back cover, Les mots sont des preuves, the words Lux had carried without reading and now couldn't stop hearing. Cesare's warning pulsed beneath it all. Before this gets more complicated, he'd known the file existed, known Julio's plan, known that the woman sitting at the end of the table wasn't just a translator, she was evidence. And he'd tried to give her a window to leave before the window closed. The window was closed now, not by Julio, by Breck, by FinCEN, by the compounding weight of systems that had been running beneath Lux's life like cables under a street. Invisible, essential, carrying power she didn't control. She picked up the dictionary, opened to the back cover. Odette's handwriting. 5 words in French. The last instruction her mother would ever give her. Words are evidence. Tomorrow, she'd make them count. Tonight, She sat in a basement kitchen and felt the full weight of a life that had been wired without her consent. And the man across the table, the man who'd called her valuable, who'd given her a lock, who'd handed her a file instead of a command, sat with her in the silence and didn't try to fill it. Because Julio Barbieri understood something Breck Holloway never had. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can offer a woman who's been silenced isn't your voice, it's your quiet. At day 3, 8:30 a.m., Federal Plaza, Lower Manhattan, Lux walked in alone. This was the condition she'd set, non-negotiable. Julio had offered to accompany her. Ronan Calvanese had prepared to present the documentation. Cesare had positioned a car outside the building with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd been managing exits for decades. Lux declined all of it. If I walk in with your attorney and your security and your infrastructure, I'm still inside a man's framework. Yo, different man, same architecture. Julio hadn't argued, handed her the file, watched her leave the brownstone at 7:45 a.m. carrying a stack of documents in one hand and a leather-bound dictionary in the other. She took the subway. R train. Carroll Gardens to Whitehall. 32 minutes. Yes, the commute of an ordinary woman on an ordinary morning, except the documents in her bag contained evidence of a money laundering operation, and the dictionary contained her mother's final instruction, and the woman carrying both had spent 3 years being told her words had no value. Federal Plaza. Security checkpoint. ID verification. A waiting room with fluorescent lighting and chairs designed for function rather than comfort. I'd like to speak with a FinCEN investigator, Lux said to the intake officer. My name is Lux Pemberton. My bank account was flagged 6 weeks ago for suspicious activity. I'm here to provide voluntary testimony and documentation regarding the source of those transactions. The investigator's name was Petra Aguilar. 40. Sharp. Saw the specific energy of a federal agent who'd been working financial crimes long enough to distinguish between people who came in scared and people who came in prepared. Lux was both. They sat in an interview room. Gray walls, one table. Recording equipment that Petra activated with Lux's verbal consent. Stated clearly, on the record, the voice of a woman who understood that every word from this point forward was architecture. Walk me through it, Petra said. Lux opened the file, page by page. The LinguaPoint corporate structure, the subsidiary platforms, the onboarding clause granting administrative access, the transaction records showing deposits and withdrawals she hadn't authorized, the timeline, 11 months of her bank account being used as a conduit while she took freelance jobs and paid rent and built what she thought was an independent life. Who compiled this documentation? Petra asked. A private party who identified the pattern independently. The documentation is verifiable through LinguaPoint's corporate filings and my banking records. The private party, are they connected to the flagged transactions? No. They're connected to me, and they provided this because they believed I deserved to know what was being done with my identity before your investigation reached my door. Petra studied the file for 11 minutes. Lux counted, yet not consciously, the way you count, when you're sitting in a room where your future is being evaluated and the clock becomes the only thing you can control. This is substantial, Petra said. The corporate structure alone would take us months to map independently. You've handed us the blueprint. My mother was a translator. She taught me that words are evidence. Every word in that file was written by Breck Holloway or his legal team. Yet I'm just translating it into something your office can use. Petra looked at Lux. The assessment of an investigator, recalibrating. This wasn't a scared woman surrendering. This was a witness presenting a case. We'll need formal testimony, multiple sessions, and we'll need to verify the sourcing. I'll give you whatever you need. But I have one condition. Federal investigations don't typically accommodate conditions. This one should. The man who built this operation also filed a missing persons report against me yesterday. with a psychiatric hold request. I need that report voided before I leave this building. The report was voided by noon. Petra Aguilar made 2 calls. The first to the 32nd Precinct, confirming that Lux Pemberton was present, lucid, cooperative, and voluntarily providing federal testimony. Just the missing persons case was closed with a notation that the filing party's claims were inconsistent with observed evidence. The second call, to FinCEN's Enforcement Division, requesting an expedited review of LinguaPoint's corporate accounts based on cooperating witness testimony. Breck Holloway's infrastructure, the platform, the clauses, the routing system, the administrative access, was now inside a federal investigation, not as a flag, but as a target. Lux walked out of Federal Plaza at 1:17 p.m. Same dictionary, same bag. Lighter, not physically, but structurally. The weight of 11 months of invisible control lifting with each step down the courthouse stairs. She called Julio from a payphone on Broadway. Not the prepaid he'd given her. A payphone. The deliberate choice of a woman communicating on her own terms through her own channels. "It's done," she said. "Petra Aguilar. FinCEN Enforcement. Yeah, she has everything." "How did it go?" I translated. That's what I do. Here's what happened next. And here's where Julio Barbieri made a choice that cost him something real. Julio called Petra Aguilar that afternoon. Identified himself. Not through Ronan, not through intermediaries. Directly. A man whose family operated in South Brooklyn's shadow economy, picking up a phone and calling a federal agent by name. "My name is Julio Barbieri. I compiled the LinguaPoint documentation that Lux Pemberton presented to your office this morning. I'm prepared to provide supplementary testimony regarding the financial networks connected to Breck Holloway's operation." Supplementary testimony from a man whose family business included the kind of lending and contracting that didn't survive federal scrutiny. Julio was opening a door that couldn't be closed, inviting investigators into a proximity that would expose not just Breck's operation, but the edges of his own. Cesare warned him. The phone call lasted 4 minutes and contained the word reckless 7 times. Julio's response, delivered with the calm of a man who'd already calculated the cost and accepted it. "Rinaldo died because I didn't act fast enough. I'm not making that mistake twice." Rinaldo. The brother Lux didn't know about yet. The name Julio hadn't spoken aloud in months. The ghost that had been driving every decision since a night 2 years ago, when a door was broken down and nobody on the other side was willing to help. By evening, Lux was back at the social club. Kitchen table, dictionary open. Julio across from her with 2 espresso cups and the specific quiet of a man who'd just handed a federal agent the thread that could unravel his own family's insulation. "You called her," Lux said. "Aguilar. Done directly. She needed corroboration. She needed your name attached to that file, which means federal investigators now have a reason to look at your family's operations. Not just Breck's." "I know what it means." "Why would you do that?" Julio looked at her. Direct, unguarded. The first time the careful architecture of his composure showed a seam. Not cracked, not broken, just visible. The glimpse of a man beneath the structure. "Because you walked into that building alone, yet with a dictionary and a file and nothing else. No attorney, no protection, no framework except your own." He paused. "A woman who does that deserves someone willing to take a risk that matches hers." Lux held his gaze. Not the 5-second assessment from yesterday. Longer. The sustained eye contact of a woman who was learning, slowly, carefully, with the caution of someone who'd been burned by every hand that claimed warmth, to distinguish between men who offered shelter and men who offered equality. Julio was offering equality, the rarest thing, rarer than protection, rarer than power, a matching risk. Day 5, 6:12 a.m. Carroll Gardens. FinCEN moved on a Friday, coordinated execution. 4 locations simultaneously. Lingua Point's Midtown office, Breck's apartment in Murray Hill, a satellite office in Jersey City, and a data storage facility in the Bronx that housed the servers routing transactions through 43 freelancer accounts. Petra Aguilar led the Midtown operation personally. 8 agents, 2 forensic accountants, a warrant that read like a novel, 17 pages detailing the corporate structure, the subsidiary platforms, the administrative access clauses, the transaction patterns. Every page built on 2 foundations, Julio's file and Lux's testimony. Breck wasn't at the Midtown office. It wasn't at his apartment. The Murray Hill team found an empty unit, bed made, closet half cleared, the specific disarray of a man who'd left in a hurry, but not in a panic. Calculated departure, selective packing, the behavior of someone who'd been warned. Petra called Julio at 7:30 a.m. Holloway's in the wind, left his apartment sometime in the last 12 hours. Passports still flagged. He's not getting out of the country, but he's mobile. He was warned, Julio said. Someone inside the operation, presumably. We're reviewing communications, but right now, he's gone, and he knows we're coming. Julio hung up, looked at Lux across the kitchen table. She'd heard everything, the phone's speaker carrying Petra's voice through the room like a broadcast. He's coming here, Lux said. He doesn't know you're here. He tracked me to this building 4 days ago, broke down the door. He knows exactly where I am. Julio called Cesare, called Salvatore. Yinan called 2 men whose names Lux hadn't learned because some names in this world were kept below the surface like foundations, essential, invisible, supporting everything above them. By 8 a.m., the social club was secured. New door, steel reinforced, installed at 6 a.m. that morning by a contractor who arrived without being called because Salvatore had anticipated the need 3 days ago. The kitchen occupied by 4 men positioned at intervals that looked casual and functioned as geometry. A Lux sat at the table, dictionary in her lap, not hiding, not running, seated in the room where this had started, the same chair, the same position at the end of the table, because a woman who'd walked into Federal Plaza alone wasn't going to be relocated to a back room while men managed her safety from the front. I want to be here when he comes, she said. Lux? I didn't stutter, and I didn't ask permission. I said I want to be here. Drop a comment right now and tell me what you're feeling. Because this woman who couldn't say no for 3 years, just told a room full of dangerous men where she intended to stand. And not one of them argued. He came at 11:43 a.m. Not through the door this time. Smarter than that. Through the alley entrance, a service access that connected to the kitchen through a utility corridor Breck had apparently mapped during his first visit. Chang, the specific preparation of a man who broke down doors as a first strategy and found back entrances as a second. The utility corridor door opened. Breck stepped into the kitchen. Alone. No backup. No weapon visible. The arrogance of a man who'd spent 3 years controlling a woman through systems and believed the systems still held. He saw the table, the men, the geometry. He saw Lux. We need to talk, Breck said. To Lux, past every man in the room. He had the tunnel vision of an abuser who could only see the person he'd designated as his. You went to the feds. You handed them my company. Do you understand what you've done? Yes, Lux said. I translated. You destroyed everything I built. You built it on my name, my account, my identity, 43 people's identities. You didn't build a company. You built a parasite, and you hid it inside the lives of people who trusted you. Breck stepped forward. 1 step. Yet the same trajectory as 4 nights ago, toward Lux, past the table, through whatever stood between him and the woman he considered his operating system. Cesare didn't move this time, didn't need to. Julio stood, walked to the space between Breck and Lux, not blocking, occupying. The distinction mattered. He wasn't a wall preventing Breck's movement. He was a man standing in a specific location and making it clear that the location was no longer available. 4 nights ago, Julio said. So I told you to leave and not look for her again. You're here, which means my words weren't clear enough, so let me use different ones. He reached into the file on the table, pulled a single page, held it up. This is a sworn affidavit from Lux Pemberton detailing 3 years of domestic abuse, financial control, identity theft, and systematic isolation. Filed with Petra Aguilar at FinCEN. Copies with the NYPD Domestic Violence Unit and the Brooklyn DA's office. Breck's face changed. And not fear, recognition. The expression of a man seeing his own infrastructure described on paper and understanding that the woman he'd silenced had learned to use the one thing he'd tried to take from her. Words. This is the affidavit, Julio continued. Here's what isn't on paper. You're standing in a room with men who've been in rooms like this for longer than you've been alive. Men who don't file paperwork. Men who don't call attorneys. Men whose memory for faces is exceptional and whose patience for men who hurt women is non-existent. Julio set the affidavit on the table, picked up his espresso. The same gesture from 4 nights ago, the deliberate sip, the unhurried placement of cup on wood. The performance of a man demonstrating that Breck Holloway had not elevated his heart rate. The feds are looking for you. Your accounts are frozen. Your servers are seized. Your company is evidence. Yet you have nothing left to take from her, and nothing left to come back for. Breck looked at Lux. One last time. Searching for the woman he'd built. The quiet one, the small one, the one who looked away when he entered a room and made herself furniture when his voice got loud. She wasn't there. The woman at the end of the table looked back at him with the steady, unlocked gaze of someone who'd found her voice in a room full of men who killed for less, and discovered that the voice had been there all along. Buried, not broken, waiting for a room that would let her use it. Goodbye, Breck, Lux said. Not loud, not dramatic. The calm, complete sentence of a woman closing a door she'd been trying to close for 3 years. Breck turned, walked to the utility corridor, disappeared into the alley. 20 minutes later, Petra Aguilar's team picked him up 6 blocks away, walking south on Court Street. No bag, no plan. The trajectory of a man whose systems had been turned inside out by the woman he'd wired them around. Arrested, cuffed, federal vehicle, the specific bureaucratic machinery of a system that was, for once, working in the right direction. The kitchen went quiet, espresso machine humming, herbs on the windowsill, the dictionary in Lux's lap, rubber band intact. Odette's inscription in the back cover still carrying the 5 words that had driven every decision since Lux read them. Les mots sont des preuves. Words are evidence. And Lux Pemberton had just provided enough of them to end a man's empire without raising her voice. 3 months later, January. The accounts were unfrozen on a Tuesday. Not just Lux's. All 43. Petra Aguilar's team had spent 11 weeks untangling the LinguaPoint web, tracing every transaction, verifying every pass-through, separating the legitimate freelance payments from the laundered funds. Each account was restored with a letter from FinCEN, confirming the holder's status as an unknowing victim of financial fraud. 43 letters. 43 people who'd been building lives on top of a system designed to use them. 43 translators, contractors, and freelancers who discovered that the direct deposits they'd relied on were woven into a criminal operation they never consented to. Lux read her letter at the kitchen table. The kitchen. Same table. Same herbs on the windowsill, though the basil had been replaced with winter rosemary and the thyme had outgrown its pot. Same espresso machine humming its permanent mechanical song. She hadn't left the social club, not because she couldn't. The door was unlocked, had been since night one. Julio had never adjusted that policy. The lock belonged to her, the exit belonged to her. The decision to stay or leave refreshed itself every morning like a vow that required daily renewal rather than permanent assumption. She stayed because the building had become something she hadn't experienced since Steinway Street, since Odette. Since a walk-up apartment where French was spoken at breakfast and Italian, with the neighbors and a leather-bound dictionary sat on a kitchen table like a family member. The social club felt like language, layered, alive, requiring interpretation but rewarding the effort. Breck Holloway pleaded guilty in December. Federal charges, money laundering, wire fraud, identity theft, 43 counts. The plea deal spared him a trial, but not the sentence. 7 years. Federal facility. Yes, the specific institutional consequence of a man who'd built an empire on other people's names and discovered that names have owners who eventually speak up. The domestic violence charges were filed separately. State level. Brooklyn DA. Lux provided testimony. 3 sessions. Recorded. Transcribed. Her voice on the record. Permanent. The words she'd been unable to say for 3 years now, preserved in a legal document that would outlast every bruise Breck had ever left. Yet he received an additional 18 months. Consecutive. The judge, a woman named Honorable Suki Feinberg, noted in her ruling that the defendant had weaponized institutional systems against his victim with a sophistication that elevated the abuse beyond physical violence into structural control. Structural control. The legal system had found words for what Breck did. Lux's mother would have appreciated that. A translator's daughter teaching a courtroom new vocabulary. And now, what you've been waiting for. Not the verdict, not the sentencing. The quiet part. The part that happens after the systems finish processing and 2 people are left standing in a kitchen with espresso and herbs. And a question neither of them has asked out loud. Julio and Lux didn't rush. This was the thing that surprised people who watched from the edges. Cesare, Salvatore, the men whose names lived below the surface. They expected velocity. 2 people drawn together by crisis tend to collapse into each other when the crisis ends. The gravitational pull of shared danger converting into something urgent and consuming. Julio and Lux didn't collapse. They built. Slowly. The way Odette taught Lux languages, not through formal instruction, but through living. Espresso in the morning, conversations that started in English and drifted into Italian when the topic required more texture. Saint walks through Carroll Gardens in December, the cold specific and sharp, the harbor smell permanent, the brownstones wearing their winter faces. Julio showed her the construction projects. His actual work. The buildings his family developed, the contracts he managed, the blueprints he kept in a drafting room above the social club that nobody used anymore, because the man who'd loved building had spent 2 years doing everything except build. He started drawing again. February. A Lux found him at the drafting table on a Sunday morning, pencil moving, shoulders down, the posture of a man rediscovering a version of himself he'd archived after loss. "What are you designing?" she asked. "A room. Upstairs. More light. Better windows." He looked at her, the direct gaze that had started as assessment and evolved into something that didn't have a name in English, but existed in Italian, riconoscimento. Recognition. It's the act of seeing someone fully and letting them see you back. "For whom?" she asked. "For someone who needs a room with a door she controls and windows that face something better than an alley." Lux moved into the room in March. Not because Julio asked, because she chose. The distinction, the permanent, non-negotiable distinction that defined everything between them, was that every threshold she crossed in this building was crossed on her own legs, through her own decision, with the door unlocked behind her. She resumed freelance work. New agency, independent, verified, no subsidiary connections. She rebuilt her client list the way Odette had built hers, one contract at a time, each one vetted, each one hers. The dictionary sat on the kitchen table, not in her bag anymore, on the table, open, accessible, Odette's margin notes visible to anyone who sat down for espresso. Yet it had traveled from a walk-up in Astoria, through 3 years of silence, through a basement kitchen, through Federal Plaza, through a courtroom, and arrived, finally, at a resting place where it didn't need to be hidden or protected, or clutched against a body, bracing for impact. It sat on the table, the way books sit in homes where they're welcome. Spine cracked, rubber band retired, pages open to the R's. Riconoscimento. Hold this. The last lesson. Yay. The one this entire story has been building toward, since a woman sat at the end of a table and translated other people's words because she'd forgotten the value of her own. You don't heal by being saved. You heal by being heard. And the people who truly love you will make room for your voice, not fill the silence for you. Julio never spoke for Lux, never answered questions directed at her, never translated her experience into his language. And he sat in the quiet and waited for her words. And when they came, he listened the way his kitchen listened, patiently, completely, without trying to change what was being said. If you have that, protect it. If you don't, demand it. Your voice is not a privilege someone grants you. It's the thing you were born with. And anyone who tries to take it from you has told you everything you need to know about who they are. A Sunday in March. Evening. The kitchen. Espresso. The dictionary on the table between them. Odette's handwriting catching the light from the overhead fixture that Julio had rewired himself because the old one flickered, and Lux mentioned once that flickering lights reminded her of the Murray Hill apartment. He'd changed the light without telling her. She'd noticed without mentioning it. The specific communication of two people who'd learned each other's language, not Italian, not English, but the private dialect that develops between people who pay attention. My mother wrote something in the back of this dictionary, Lux said. I carried it for 7 years without reading it. What did she write? Les mots sont des preuves. Words are evidence. She was right. She was always right. I just couldn't hear her until I was sitting in a basement kitchen, surrounded by men who scared everyone except me. Julio looked at her, yet the look that had evolved across 3 months, from assessment to recognition to something that lived beyond either. The expression of a man who'd spent 2 years building cases and filing evidence and managing the machinery of justice, and had discovered that the thing he'd actually been building was a table where a woman felt safe enough to set down her mother's dictionary and leave it open. You weren't scared? He asked. I was terrified, but terror and silence aren't the same thing. I'd been silent for 3 years. In your kitchen, I was terrified and speaking. That's the difference. She reached across the table, took his hand. Not desperately, not tentatively. The deliberate grip of a woman who'd walked into a federal building alone and testified against the man who'd stolen her voice and rebuilt her life, one contract at a time, and chosen, actively, daily, with the door unlocked behind her, to sit at this table with this man. Thank you, she said, for the quiet. Julio held her hand, the way he held everything, steadily, without performance, with the understanding that the most valuable things in his life had never been the ones he built. They were the ones he made room for. Thank you for being here, all 9 parts. Every door broken down and every door left unlocked, every comment dropped and every city shared. This story was about voice, about a woman who was taught that her words had no value by a man who was using those same words to build a criminal empire, about a mother who wrote 5 words in the back of a dictionary and waited 7 years for her daughter to read them. About a kitchen full of dangerous men who heard a woman speak and decided, without discussion, without debate, that her voice was worth protecting. If something in Lux's journey found you, if you've ever been silenced, if you've ever been made small, yet if you've ever carried something your mother gave you without understanding why until the worst night of your life, tell me. Drop it in the comments. One word, one sentence, the whole story. This space is yours, the way Lux's voice was always hers. And if you haven't subscribed, you just spent 9 parts in this kitchen. You felt the espresso. You heard the door break. You watched a woman find 5 words in French that changed everything. You're not a visitor anymore. You're family. Make it official. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Speak, even when your voice shakes, especially then. See you tomorrow.